Imagine it's a beautiful day in April of 2017. Three children in different parts of the world are going about their daily lives as they do every day, and as their parents have done for countless generations. Meet Hiro in Japan. Hiro wants to be a successful banker one day just like his father, but right now he's more interested in spaceships and planets. Abasi lives in Kenya with his parents and grandparents. One day he wants to travel the world in his own little sailboat. Akash lives in India with his big happy family. When Akash grows up, he wants to be the world's greatest chef. And so life goes on. Hiro becomes an astronaut, much to his father's surprise. Abasi travels the world in his sailboat, and Akash opens up his own restaurant in his hometown. They grow old and pass on, having lived fulfilled lives. Their children follow, and their children's children, until one day, in April of 2100. Eiko and his family are crammed with thousands of other people at Haneda Airport, hoping it's not too late. Sadly, the people of Tokyo never had a chance. The once proud city is reduced to rubble by a tsunami the likes of which has never been seen. Anasa lies in the dark of his quiet home, and he knows his time has come. It hasn't rained in months. All the crops and livestock have died, and the well dried up long ago. The people of Kenya suffer the slow death of starvation and dehydration. Ani draws ragged breaths in his hospital bed. His body ravaged by disease, he is the last living member of his family. The population of India has fallen drastically. These are a few hypothetical scenarios from various parts of the globe. While they may seem unrelated, they all share a common catalyst: climate change. As 2017 begins and the United States presidency changes hands, it has become increasingly apparent that the new regime is full of climate change deniers and fossil fuel advocates. It is more important than ever to spread real information regarding climate change and the catastrophic effects it could produce within the next 100 years. Let's start with a common misconception. When some people hear the term global warming, they'll point to an instance of colder than normal weather, like the Sahara Desert recently, and say, "That's ridiculous, it's snowing here." This objection stems from a misunderstanding of how weather differs from climate. Weather refers to local changes over short periods of time, such as minutes, hours, days, or weeks. Typical examples of weather include rain, clouds, snow, wind, and thunderstorms. Climate refers to longer-term averages and may be regional or global in scale, and can be thought of as weather averaged over an extended period of time, typically years or decades. An easy way to remember the distinction is, weather is what you get, climate is what you expect. Now that we have a good understanding of how climate and weather differ, let's look at the scientific consensus. Over 97% of actively publishing climate scientists agree that climate warming trends over the past 100 years are extremely likely to have been caused largely by human activity. That number goes up to over 99% if you include climate scientists who have not recently published scholarly articles. Most of the leading scientific organizations around the world have issued public statements endorsing this position. There are too many to list in this video, so I've put a link in the description of organizations and their statements. Climate change deniers tend to latch onto studies that disprove the trend, but you'll always notice that the studies are either not peer-reviewed, come from a known anti-science publisher, or come from a scientist in a completely unrelated field with an agenda of their own. So, where does this problem come from? The largest contributing factor to climate change is the burning of fossil fuels. Oil, coal, and natural gas all release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when burned. Carbon dioxide is considered a greenhouse gas, which simply means it sticks around in the upper atmosphere and traps heat. The more carbon dioxide is released, the more the atmosphere heats up. This temperature increase then causes other problems, such as melting glaciers and polar ice. As Arctic ice melts, it releases CO2 and methane, a more potent greenhouse gas, compounding the problem by making the atmosphere even warmer, thus melting more ice. It's a vicious cycle. Okay, but where do we stand right now? What's the damage? As of the end of 2016, carbon dioxide levels are up by nearly 405 parts per million, the highest in 650,000 years. Global temperature is up by 1.7 degrees since 1880, and 9 of the last 10 hottest years on record happened since 2000, the 10th being 1998. Arctic ice is shrinking at a rate of 13.3% per decade, and land ice is disappearing at a rate of 281 gigatons per year. Greenland ice loss doubled between 1996 and 2005, and finally, the global sea level has risen 7 inches in the last 100 years. You're probably thinking, well, that doesn't sound too bad. Let's look at the consequences by category. First, the melting of polar ice. Of course, we've all heard that global warming affects the poor polar bears. But it's true, and it's severe. At the current rate of melting, which is likely to increase, the Arctic is projected to see its first ice-free summer by 2050. Imagine that. All of the ice. Gone. And yes, that likely means extinction for the polar bears within 100 years. And it's not just polar bears. Some species of ice-dependent seals will die off if they can't adapt, including harp, ringed, ribbon, and bearded seals. Then there are the ivory gulls and auks. Ivory gulls have already suffered a 90% population reduction in Canada over the past 20 years. Then there's the walrus, the Arctic fox, small plant eaters like ground squirrels, hares, lemmings, and voles, large plant eaters like moose, caribou, reindeer, and muskox, and meat eaters like weasels, wolverines, wolves, foxes, bears, and birds of prey. The melting ice is likely to cause a domino effect, knocking out species that other species depend upon for food. Melting ice brings us to our next category, rising sea level. Over the past 100 years, the global sea level has risen approximately 7 inches. The more alarming fact is that the rate of rise in the last decade is nearly double the rate of the entire last century. At this rate, rising sea level puts coastal cities and islands at great risk. As seawater reaches further inland, it can cause destructive erosion, flooding of wetlands, contamination of aquifers and agricultural soils, and lost habitat for fish, birds, and plants. Most projections show the sea level will rise between 0.8 and 2 meters by 2100, which would be catastrophic for many low-lying islands and much of the eastern coast of the United States. More dire predictions, based upon the complete melting of the Greenland ice sheet, project a rise of up to 7 meters. That's enough to submerge London. The third category is the one with which most people are familiar: global temperature rise. As CO2 accumulates in our atmosphere, the temperature creeps steadily upward. The annual increase is measured at roughly 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit. This increase in temperature could cause the most drastic immediate effects of all three categories. The list is long and distressing, so here we go. Global warming will cause droughts and heat waves, which are already responsible for killing more people per year than floods, hurricanes, lightning, and tornadoes combined. It will aggravate the spread of disease. Warmer weather allows disease bearers to be active longer and further abroad. Warmer ocean temperatures will allow pathogens to flourish, as we've already seen with the widespread coral bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. This coral houses 25% of all marine diversity, and the reef has already declined by 50% in the last 30 years. When the coral goes, we'll lose hundreds of thousands of species dependent upon it for shelter, which will collapse much of the marine food chain. Back on land, fishing will suffer. Droughts will destroy crops and livestock and create a water scarcity, pushing farmers and people in rural areas into the city. This will cause overcrowding and help spark civil wars that kill hundreds of thousands like it did in Syria. GDP is expected to plummet by 23% by 2100, caused by property damage from flooding, droughts, wildfires, storms, loss of productivity, loss of tourism, and illness. You can see how quickly the situation can snowball wildly out of control. It seems very dire, but what can we do? Is it too late to stop the changes we've put in motion? It's hard to say for sure, but the effect humans have had on this earth is severe, and the changes have indeed been set in motion. Even if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases today, global warming would continue for at least several more decades, since carbon dioxide can linger in the atmosphere for up to centuries. Some experts believe we're approaching a tipping point, a point at which abrupt, perhaps irreversible changes would tip our climate into a new state. However, it may not be too late to limit some of the worst effects of climate change. 2 important steps are required. 1. Mitigation, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And 2. Adaptation, learning to cope with and adapt to the climate changes that have already been set in motion. Recycling and driving fuel-efficient cars are important steps in the right direction, but not sufficient on their own. It will take a globally coordinated response, such as clean energy agreements between nations, as well as local efforts on the city and regional level, such as sustainable city planning, public transportation upgrades, and energy efficiency improvements. So yes, climate change is the biggest threat to existence as we know it, and it's deeply troubling that the United States government seeks to normalize ignorance of good science. So if you're concerned for the future of the planet and generations to come, do your part. Help spread this information, because the Earth truly is worth saving. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or a comment, and subscribe to keep up with the latest content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.